Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. We're talking about the changing shape of the legal IT team, or building the legal IT team for the future. Welcome. If you're joining us, please enable your chat function and type where you are listening in from. This is intended to be a really interactive session. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about the changing role of IT, how technology is influencing business strategy. And we've published a survey which is still open, and we'll share a link during the course of this conversation. We've had really great responses, and we're going to be going through the answers, or some of the answers to the questions that we posed, which form the basis of a really good conversation with my guests. I've got James Temple, who many of you will know. James is Chief Operating Officer of UK top 200 firm Seddons. He works alongside the firm's partners to formulate Seddons' business strategy. It's a rather busy time for him because Seddons has just merged with Lawrence Stevens. Hi, James.
Hello. Afternoon.
Afternoon. Thanks for joining us despite everything going on. So James has also overseen several years of intensive transformation. And before we launch into the answers to the questions, we're going to hear from James a little bit about that. I'm also joined by David Fazakali, who's Legal CIO at Cloud and Managed IT Provider CTS. Hi, David.
Hello, and I knew James when he had her, before all that stress and all that responsibility, but it's lovely to be here.
David was previously CIO and a director at Macmillan Williams Solicitors for many years, although I'm not allowed to say many years, am I, David?
Middling years.
I got picked up on saying that David has been in the industry for lots of years. So I'm very young, actually. I'm very young. So while we're waiting, hopefully we'll have a few more people, but thank you so much for joining. Just jump in and say who you are, where you're from. So James, just to kick us off, so we've got quite a few questions, sort of topics of conversation to go through. But just quickly, if that's possible, because I know you've been doing rather a lot, just describe the transformation program that you've been engaged with. I guess one of those was selecting CTS. So I think that's 2018. But just talk us through some of the key sort of changes.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I think it's fair to say we developed a business strategy a few years ago to basically get our foundations in good shape in order for us to be able to scale the business, which was very much focused on growth once we had those foundations in place. So we really looked at how we delivered our services, specifically around IT, to the business, and we decided to go down the outsourcing route. So yeah, we embarked on a journey to really look at our key infrastructure services, our security services, and some other services around IT, and look at how we could deliver those in the most efficient way, in a way that was scalable, so we could ramp them up as the business grows. So we embarked in a journey, certainly around infrastructure, to move into a world where that was managed by a third party, and ended up with CTS. And we did the same around things like security. So again, we have an outsourced SOC that look after us and manage our infrastructure from a security perspective. But we've also done that for things like training, for example. So we have a training provider that we bring in as and when we need them, so we can scale that up and down. But we basically live in a world now where we have vendors providing app support. We have in-house service desk because they work alongside the business, and we have that close relationship. But we look really to make sure that the work we do within the IT team with the business is focused around adding value, around innovation, and around ensuring IT kind of delivers in line with our wider business strategy. So the actual team we have on the ground within the business is small, it's agile, it has a low cost, but the outsourced services that I talked about enable us to scale things up as and when we need them. And I think the merger is probably a culmination of that strategy. So in terms of growth, we've grown over the last few years in terms of bringing lateral hires into the business, but that culminated in us announcing a couple of weeks ago that we've got this merger happening. The aim is for that to complete on the 1st of October. So it's a pretty busy time at the moment. But basically we have a set of services and capabilities that I can effectively just turn the switch up on and scale those up for another 100 people coming into the firm. So the platform is there to grow.
We've lost David. I think we just plough ahead anyway. Hopefully we can get David back on. I think in light of time, I think we'll just sort of push ahead. So we asked perhaps Emma, who's here from Legal IT Insider, you can help with that. Thanks, nice to see you, Stuart Chapman and Susan Kemp, and anybody else jump in. So we asked what percentage of your IT department's time is spent on value add and innovation projects rather than keeping the lights on. I think, and the vast majority, or a significant majority, said 0 to 20%. That was followed by 20 to 40%. So 43 said, I think we got David back. 43% said 0 to 20, 35% 20 to 40. Does that surprise you, James? I think I've probably, if you've gone the way that you've gone, you would probably hope for it to be higher. But I guess things are changing as people adopt cloud increasingly.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from my interactions with the legal IT community, I think that, you know, the balance of that probably is changing for us, as I've mentioned in my opening ramblings. I think that, yeah, I think we're much higher up the curve. We're probably in the kind of 60 to 80%, which is seemingly, you know, not the norm at the moment, and people are still in keeping the lights on now. But I suspect we're going to see those percentages change over the coming years as people kind of follow the journey that we've been on, embrace the cloud, and certainly now the vendors are providing lots of, you know, software as a service, and you don't have to host that on your own kit and tin and water and feed it. I think that, you know, we're going to see a bit of a change in the landscape on that front. Yeah,
I think David, good to have you back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't want to get in James's way. That's what it was. So, you know, I could blame the Wi-Fi, but it's much easier.
First time for everything. Yeah.
Give James the glory.
We were just saying, in terms of the amount of IT departments' time spent on value add projects, it's relatively low. And
I was a bit surprised.
Yeah.
At it, actually. Yeah. And the biggest thing in my mind was there's a difference between the reality and aspiration, just maybe, and I'm curious as to, I don't know, you may have asked our guests whilst I was thinking about the Wi-Fi there, but is that just what the reality check of where things are today, or is that where people believe the bar should be? Because my own view is, you know, you shouldn't be 100% technology because you're a law firm and law firms do legal things, but I personally would hope that people want to be more in the middle bar, shall we say, that is lower.
We're going to do a poll. Perhaps, Emma, if you could tee that up, that would be great. Because we also asked, to what extent is technology influencing your firm's overall business strategy? So a significant majority said that it is a partial influence. Some said, so that's 89%, 8% said the main influence, 2 said no influence. I'd love to know which firm. I'd love to go back and have a word with them. So I don't know if you can queue up the poll just to see. I'd be curious to those of you listening in as to what extent, David, I think your observation was, what does that really mean in terms of partialism?
Yes. That's right, actually, on the partial bit, which could be any range up from 1% to 49%, couldn't it? So I thought it might be curious to see what our attendees say.
Yeah, have a vote. If you're listening in, have a vote. So to what extent is technology influencing your overall business strategy in percentage terms? Hopefully we haven't got any IT issues. This is one of those days. If no one votes, we'll just assume that we're having tech issues. But if you could just vote.
I can see the poll, but I'm not allowed to vote. So
I think Stu and Susan, you need to vote. I'll just give that a second. I hope it's working. If not, then we won't run any more polls. It's going to be one of those days. But I think, yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? And we were saying, David, when you were off, you know, when you just bit about how you know, how as you move more towards cloud services, it enables you in terms of, oh, someone's made a comment, and it enables you to spend more time on, or more money on value add and innovation, rather than keeping the lights on, etc.
Yeah, and it's a key point there, isn't it, from one of our contributors in the question there, that actually there's a lot of work for the team to do on, you know, patching, security, keeping things going, that gets in the way of delivering that sort of value add. And I suppose it's obvious, however, CTS, I would be someone to say, you know, it is about maybe tasking as well as outsourcing bits and pieces, so that you can get back to that core. I know that's part of James's core strategy as well.
So
what I'd say to that is that, you know, we have outsourced large chunks of that, and it does free us up to focus on other tasks. But I think later in the survey we talk about resources and reskilling and the mix of how that impacts the team.
Yeah. So actually, I'm just going to read. So Orlando, thank you for your comment. So I'm just going to read it out for the benefit of anyone listening in when not on live, etc. So I'd love to spend more time on value add, but there's too much to do for a small team to keep on top of security, patching, broken laptops, agile working. This is a theme that we see time and time again, and you're right, it does come up later on in the survey. So thanks for that. I think it's a recurring theme. Anyone else with any kind of similar observations, do jump in. So this is something really of real interest to me. We asked, do you believe that IT could eventually become decentralized, with each legal team using their own technical resources to meet their business needs? So my first thoughts when we saw this was, oh dear God. But James, actually, you've got some really interesting observations, having moved to more of a SaaS model.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously within the realms of our governance model, within the realms of our security framework. So this is very much not a case of people just going off and doing their own thing, you know, shadow IT gone nuts. But I just do think that as vendors are moving to a SaaS model, you know, the need to involve IT to stand up the infrastructure, to run applications, to customize them, to build them, to test them, etc., becomes less and less. And there is the ability now for departmental, you know, tactical departmental solutions, because they are SaaS based. And I see that could happen more and more as we move forward, as vendors move into this world, which we're already seeing a significant shift towards. And actually, you know, you move to having some sort of change experts, project managers, and training facilities within these teams, but very focused on the service delivery and actually how that department works. Because, you know, we're a full service firm, so the way that our corporate department functions versus our resi team are a million miles apart. The service they offer, the needs of their fee earners in terms of document production and the service that they're delivering to clients, hugely different. So to assume that you can put in a solution that fits across all of these different departments and different services is a big assumption. So I do think that as we see the market change, there is the scope for this balance to change with it.
Yeah,
I think the fear among some, and I include myself in my last role at a law firm, was a lack of control. And James touched on that. And there's a difference between control and uncontrol. You know, people running off left, right, and centre without any control and doing things you don't know about, and it causes problems down the line. There's a difference between that and agreed frameworks and agreed SaaS solutions, and literally allowing teams to go and do things under frameworks. And in my last law firm, I did this with the property department, and a number of property lawyers actually volunteered to, because the solutions, the SaaS solutions that we brought in were simple to, you didn't have to be a coder to configure. They actually did a much better job at actually delivering at speed what they required, working first time round, because they are property lawyers and they know the process. And it cut out a lot of unnecessary burden on IT. So I agree. I think it's about, you know, having control and frameworks and understanding and doing it that way, rather than, you know, people just run off and do their own things, and it causes a lack of collaboration perhaps and cohesion between solutions. So I think that's where that's where it is, I think, in my mind. And it's still moving in that direction, of that positive direction of more empowered teams.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just going to add, you're right. There's all sorts of implications around, data. We've done a lot of work around one version of the truth and making sure our data quality is up there. And actually, by implementing tactical solutions that don't all talk to each other, you do create a problem. So you're right, having that governance model and actually a data governance model is going to be key to that actually working.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. How do you, so this was another really interesting one. So we won't have time to do all of the questions, but we will be providing a link to the survey. There's going to be time to complete it if you haven't already after this, because we're actually writing a report and the survey responses are becoming sort of relatively extensive. So obviously the more we have, the better. But so how do you expect the headcount of your firm's IT department to change over the next 3 years? I think I'm surprised. I think James, we're all surprised. James and David are surprised that there's going to be some increase, and the majority said some increase. So 67% said there's going to be some increase in the headcount. 18% said significant increase by 2025. Then a smaller amount said roughly the same. I think the biggest question is why, isn't it?
Well, no one said decrease either significant or of any point, and given the move to forget outsourcing to MSPs for a second, but just the SaaS-based solutions, like we've been saying, that do a lot more out of the box for you. I'm just curious as to what is building, what is driving that. Is it growth of law firms? Is it more people focused on the value add, and you think you need more resource and I don't know. I don't know what's driving that trend. So that's a be good to, if some people throw into the chat. Here we go.
I'm posting it in the chat. If anyone's got any thoughts, please do jump in if you've got any thoughts as to why. I mean, one of the things obviously with these surveys, so we haven't sort of delved into it. It'd be great if anybody's got any thoughts as to why that is, because obviously, that it's sort of against trend in terms of everybody sort of shifting tin off premises, etc. But so then that brings us on to this is something that is talking about the skill sets, because obviously as we do progressively move more towards cloud environment, that will necessitate a completely different skill set within the IT team. So I think that there was kind of a mixture, and this, to be honest, is quite difficult to summarize because there's so many different answers, but there seems to be, when we ask people how they're reskilling effectively, there's a significant emphasis, as you would probably expect, on increasing skills around cloud technology. So what sort of steps do people need to take in order to achieve that? I feel like people aren't still talking about this enough, that people are, and actually people kind of get in trouble sometimes with talking about it, which is not particularly healthy because it's the reality that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, for me, we're already in this world. So the days of us having engineers and infrastructure guys in our team are long gone. We outsource that and we tap into a world of, I don't know, David, how many people you've got in your team on the technical side, but it's a lot more than I ever had or could have afforded to have had by myself. So that is taken care of, and as skills evolve, you rely on your suppliers to make sure they're on top of things. Certainly for security, we outsource our security. It's such a rapidly changing market that having a small team in-house and getting them to keep up to speed with the market and new trends and software that's out there is next to impossible. So we're really focused on having our technology team more focused around business analysts, project managers, change experts, pricing specialists, to really take advantage of not just the market and the world of cloud and buying infrastructure does get quite complicated. Certainly, if you're trying to deal with Azure or Amazon in terms of infrastructure, it's like a dark art, isn't it? So you need accountants and pricing specialists to deal with that side of it. But just in terms of if you are rolling out and rapidly deploying solutions that are available as a service, then having an agile set of analysts and project managers to get this software in, and then training and change managers to make sure people are adopting to these new solutions is absolutely key. So that's kind of where we're focused at the moment. And as I say, that in terms of working alongside the business strategy to make sure we're innovating, we're delivering the best service to our clients is where we're focused. So for me, that's a big shift.
I'm just going to read out comments. So just harking back just briefly to the growth. So thank you. So Stuart Chapman says, in terms of why we were asking, why would the IT team be growing? Stuart says growth in the firms, growth of the number of applications that we're looking after and have to support for our people, even if that support is inherently less technical, more by way of managing integrations between SaaS solutions and a little more tricky than when everything was on premise, and the desire to do more by way of automation, for example, MS Power Automate and MS Platform in general. Any thoughts on that?
As James was talking, as I read Stuart's comment, it did again make me reflect that when I outsourced my infrastructure a few years ago now, I saved 1.5 heads, but then I did recruit 5 heads in business analysis, project management, a little bit of development and other bits and pieces. So that I sort of understand that if you're moving your emphasis to doing more with what you've got than keeping the lights on, then sometimes that takes more people. And I think Stuart is absolutely right that not all the SaaS solutions talk nicely to one another. I've been getting into that a little bit with some people recently, actually, as to why, but there's some providers out there, some solution vendors saying, actually, all this stuff should be open architecture. It should just talk to one another. But the reality is, it's not quite there yet. So actually, and also, how much control do you give away to providers? You know, if things aren't quite right, it's a bit difficult for an IT director to look their board or your managing partners in the face and say, well, it's not me, Gov, you know, it's the SaaS provider. So I suppose there still has to be some ownership within to how things work and how they should work, and tailoring them particularly for the law firm. So there's bits of cyber in here, and understanding M365 and the whole new Microsoft stack, which was great in theory 4 years ago when we were looking at it, but it's not theory anymore, it's real, and it's an accelerating curve. And you know, even as a provider, we're having to recruit M365 technical specialists into our fold, because that is the demand in the market. So, you know, I get that.
Stuart, yeah, we've got Stuart on a rant now. This is our therapy session. It's always the way, though. That's just apps. Yeah, there's all sorts of different roles that intersect, look after all of this stuff. Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's also just that our end user, as in the lawyers, the support staff, have become more tech savvy in their home lives, and through this last 2-3 year period, become a bit more self-sufficient at home, demanding more of technology, demanding more of us. So we have to do more. We have to be better.
Funny you should say that, David, because the next question was about.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
It was like we planned it. So we didn't actually plan that segue. But so beyond the IT team, is technology changing the shape of your legal teams? Now, there's so many answers. Thank you if you did join, if you did answer. If you haven't yet, as I say, do answer. I think that, so it is. But I think pandemic has obviously accelerated this. I think, James, if you could talk about, so technology is massively changing the shape of legal teams, isn't it? And that for no one probably more than you.
Yeah, 100%. As you say, the COVID situation has meant everyone found themselves at home and less reliant on their secretaries, and we've seen a huge increase in the ability of our lawyers from the junior lawyers coming through to the senior guys. We've got stories of our guy that used to come in every day for 60 years and sat in an office with a world of paper around him, and all of a sudden he's stuck at home on a laptop and he made it work. So things that I never thought I'd see happened overnight, and I think people have learned from that, and actually embracing all sorts of technology that we never thought they would, and which has been great. So and I think that's there to stay. We've certainly done a huge amount to make sure that we're not going backwards. The implications of us having a completely hybrid, agile workforce in terms of cost are hugely beneficial to us as a business in terms of office space and productivity. And certainly for people, it's changed their lives in terms of work-life balance. So yeah, I'm sure everyone on this call is the same, that that's something we all want to maintain and benefit from going forward. But yeah, in terms of implementation, I think people are more open to new apps and technology, and hopefully, like you say, David, you know, that whole shift from home life where everything's, you know, on your phone in terms of apps, banking, and all the stuff that we do on a daily basis. That's, you know, hopefully now going to start translating into the kind of software that we can use in our businesses.
We are so in terms of priorities, so we're jumping around a little bit, but about what firms' IT investment priorities are. I think this one surprised me in terms of, and what it shows is that there's a real mixture, but there's a lot of emphasis on still for firms, and this will impact where they are on the curve in terms of what the, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on investing in practice management systems still, in document management systems. Lots of firms are still effectively building their infrastructure. Somebody, Orlando, earlier, you talked about investing in, this goes to exactly your point. Okay, so this was the vast majority of people who replied to this were really focusing on security, came up really high. So I suppose, I mean, what's good is that firms are at least building the right environment, but you know, I guess you've got to get on with it, to be honest with you. I mean, at least they're not sort of talking about naffy sort of AI projects without having done the basic work. That's what really kind of spoke to me. But I don't know about you guys, what your thoughts were on this.
I was reassured on the cyber side, only because of some of the interviews I've done of late. Only yesterday, actually, with Christian Toon from Pinson Mason. He's a fairly outspoken fellow, as people know, but he's the CISO there, and he feels that generally the industry legal sector is still behind on its investment on cyber platforms, and parts of it not quite work up to it as much as they should, and so therefore it's slightly reassuring to see that it's still high on people's agendas to address that. So that sort of bit was something I heard only yesterday. I'm curious as to what people feel on the automation front, because, you know, we've all been to these conferences for 5 years talking about AI changing the world, but there's probably more user cases out there now of genuine automation elements, repeatable, you know, RPA stuff that has business application. And I'm more now thinking that this stuff doesn't work in limited fields. I'm more interested in the cultural change within law firms and its adoptability. As in, you know, is it the next thing that lawyers will not want to not embrace because of their concerns about what it does? Or actually, as I know, a lot of law firms are downsizing their physical spaces in this new sort of different, you know, different perspective on the office workspace. Is that an imperative to drive some automation of some manual tasks in the background? And is that driving some of these priorities here? I don't know. Some of our listeners want to chip in on that.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, just if you could chip in on that, that would be great. It's interesting. There's not an awful lot of talk about automation. To be honest with you, there was, you know, introduced workflow, expanding use of RPAs. Someone has said that, and then there are a couple of mentions. So workflow processing, automation, automating digital mailroom, move to being paper light. But actually, there's sort of less, and I do think that there's still perhaps work to be done in terms of putting the infrastructure in place, working out what your processes are in order to know what you're automating. I mean, some firms are quite far along the curve with that, obviously, but
I think for us, one of the big things, you know, that we've obviously been through is a change in the way that we communicate with each other. So you know, that's both internally and in terms of clients. And for us, a big focus now is, well, how do we embrace that going forward? That the days, you know, we now have transactions from start to finish where we just do not physically see the client, and that's massively changed since the pandemic came along. So actually, what does that mean in terms of the client experience, the service that we give them, how we deliver our service is key. And I think over the next 12 months, we're going to invest a lot in in what that interaction looks like and make sure it's as smooth and as slick as possible, but also represents us as our, you know, in terms of our brand and the experience we want to give. So I think that's going to be quite a big area for us over the coming years.
Yeah, let's move on to talk about outsourcing. So we asked, what do you believe to be the commercial and cultural impacts of outsourcing core IT infrastructure management to a third party? Obviously, this is a journey, James. It's great to have you can talk from your kind of experience of this, but it's fair to say that there's still some nervousness, to be honest with you. There's sort of I haven't seen it work well, I see it work really badly, and it needs to be cost effective. There's I think the overriding feeling, and I know, David, we've talked about understanding this, there's this fear of losing control, which I think has always been there, hasn't it? You're on mute. Oh, yeah. Oh, I've got a you're on mute sign. Sorry, Carol.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So no, I think there's nervousness about control. I think actually understanding in the beginning, before you do any deal with any managed service provider, whether it's full outsourcing or out tasking, and people now sort of tend to out task particular parts rather than necessarily the whole piece. I think people have to be very clear what they want. It's not always, I saw a few comments here about, you know, it's not always about saving money. And that's right, actually. It's not. I think anyone who thinks it might be the cheapest option to go, I'm going to say no, it's not. It is about broadening experience spaces. You know, like I said before, 1.5 members of infrastructure, and when I outsourced, which was to CTS, funny enough, 7 years ago, I got a bigger resource pool of experience pool, which was beneficial for me. It didn't cost me any less. In fact, it cost me more than what we had before when I had to invest in BCP and DR and other things that are easy. Some things are easier to do than others. There has to be, I'll just say this, there has to be equity and balance in any relationship. You know, it can't be all based on the client. It certainly can't be all based on what the MSP wants. There has to be a balance of value and in it for both sides for there to be a long-term thing that works out well. And I think MSPs, I'm just to be very candid, MSPs have had a rough ride through COVID in the last few years. We all employ young people in their 20s who weren't necessarily the greatest at working from home. We're all very relieved that period's over. For as many firms as maybe CTS lose, we win back from other suppliers for the same reasons who come back in through the other door. We, a bit like the legal sector where everyone in law firms talk to one another, well, the MSPs talk to one another as well. And so it's been a little bit of a rough period that we're glad to sort of come out of. But just moving forward, you know, be clear about what you want. Don't always think it's about money saving. If it's about trying to gain experience or concentrate, I think that I won't take word out of James' mouth. Allow your IT team to concentrate on things that you think have value and treat them as a utility, but we're very clear about what you want. And the last thing I'll say on this, and I'll hand over to James, is that be careful it's not all SLA driven. And I say this as someone who's outsourced twice myself as the client, right? Both at Eversheds and at MW. If it's all based on what the contract says and the SLA says, not enough on the relationship and the rapport and the connection, then it's going to be a transactional thing rather than a one-team partnership thing. And I know it's tough, and I know it doesn't always work out, but that's just one of the things I've picked up on, you know, that I'm very conscious of.
Yeah, I agree entirely. For me, it's one of the reasons that we went down the route we did rather than going into, you know, Azure or AWS is that it was about that relationship and having someone that understands you and your business and where you're going and can support the applications that you use was a big factor for us. And you know, I personally had to go through a lot of work selling this to our business owners, our equity partners, because they looked at me like I was nuts when I first said, well, we're going to shut our server room down and we're going to move it to some place up north and you know, give it to a bunch of blokes you've never met before to look after. They looked at me like I was mad, but actually I can guarantee the security around our data in a proper hardened data center versus our cupboard along the corridor opposite the meeting room that used to be called our server room is in a much better place. So, you know, it's getting people to understand actually what you know, this migration is and what infrastructure or outsourced infrastructure really is. And as you talked about, David, you know, you're moving from a world where we had 2 people looking after all this kit and watering it and feeding it every night to a team of 50. And actually, you know, the level of support that you get from a service provider around this stuff is infinitely better. So yes, it might cost a bit more, but it's available 99.9% of the time. It's more secure, and it's, you know, in a better world. So for me, it's been a no-brainer. But you have to take the business with you on that journey.
Is relationships sort of really important, do you think, and sort of access, James, do you think, in terms of really being able to have, you know, sort of proper conversations and feeling heard and all of that kind of stuff, presumably?
Yeah, listen, sometimes you have to shout a bit, and it's not the same as having the bloke that works directly under you that you're, you know, you can run next door and talk to. But yeah, it's if it's the right company and you've been together a while and they understand you and you form those relationships, and yeah, you can make it work.
Like anything, isn't it? I suppose it's a stupid question in some ways, because I suppose like anything, isn't it, in business? Okay, if you do have any thoughts, positive or negative, around outsourcing, do jump in on the chat in terms of and share your experiences. How we're talking about within us, how have changes in working practices and technology impacted on the level of IT support from users? These results are pretty easy to summarise. So mostly they said increased, so 45%, somewhat increased, 21% significantly increased. There were some that said stayed the same, 27%, and some had decreased. I think so. I guess in some ways it's not surprising, given that we've moved to a sort of hybrid working environment. I think we sort of touched upon it a little bit before, but I guess because the way is a bit more self-sufficient, this is to be expected, is it?
Yeah, you know, your people are more used to working at home. They've had to be a little bit more self-sufficient, but also it means because they can't just turn to Sue or Fred, who sits next to them, and say, how do you do that again? I've forgotten. You know, they're going to be asking IT a lot more, because if they're working at home, there's that little bit of isolation. So they probably reach out a little bit more. They become more self-sufficient, but when they don't know and there's no one directly next to them to ask, they're going to reach out to IT. So I think that is a trend, whether you're an in-house IT department or an outsourcer. I think we've seen a trend in a rise in support-related sort of questions, and I think this new world of home and hybrid and office work is something. It's got something to do with it. It's not the only reason, but
yeah, I think people are, like you say, more self-sufficient, and actually because of the pandemic, they're less hesitant to just try stuff themselves. Yeah, you know, the classic. I don't bother calling the help desk because you just tell me to reboot. Well, actually, people, when we're in the office, came and asked us anyway, and that's what you tell them to do. But when they're at home, they think, oh, sorry, I'll restart before I call them anyway. So yeah, I think the complexity of the problems we're getting has changed because people are now fixing the simpler stuff themselves. So maybe the profile of tickets we're seeing is different.
So I think probably wrap up on, so we've asked one more question. So and I know this is an interesting one for you, James, as well. So we asked, how have client expectations of speed of service changed over the last 2 years? With this is sort of very marked higher expectations. So 56, just almost 57% said somewhat higher expectations, 24% said significantly higher expectations, and 19% said stayed the same. No one said that they're lower. So, and I know, so James, what are your thoughts about what's behind that? Actually, that's not the last one. Sorry, I've got one more after this. Anyone's got thoughts on this?
I think this was around utilisation, and during lockdown, people were stuck at home and they were working longer and harder. And actually, you know, just in terms of revenue, our revenue increased, our profitability went up because our cost reduced, and people were just working longer hours because they had nothing else to do. I don't think that's sustainable. We've seen the kind of impact of that as we come back to some sort of normality and people are coming back into the office. I definitely think productivity levels are going back to whatever you think normal was, but I just think that was an effect of the pandemic. I think clients got used to just having their fee earners available to them 24/7, and people were more willing to kind of work in that way. Yeah, I think it's we're finding a better balance now.
I've got a question for you, James, and this is more about human nature and the change in people, less to do with technology. Just maybe I'm becoming a grumpy old man. Okay, let me just put that out there. And I know Caroline, you said
call you old, David.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll call myself old. I think people are just getting less patient about everything. And maybe it is the grumpy old man in me, where I just see that people just want every this instantaneous culture where everything has to be now. And I wonder how much of that feeds into some of this, or how much of it is just a higher service expectation versus we've all got no patience for anything at the moment. We're all sort of, anxious and angry all the time. I do think anxiety levels have gone up, actually, by the way. It's my personal feeling, people working from home. I had to deal with a team and getting them back into the office 6, 7 months ago, where they were quite anxious to come back in. They had all this anxiety that they didn't have before. And I think it was isolation. And once they were back in, they were fine. It was, and I just wonder how many of these things have fed into this stuff about, people are just very demanding all the time, and
I agree with you.
Curious.
A lot of anxiety. I've seen exactly the same thing, David. Just anxiety, whether it be even kids go back to school, isolation is quite, challenge, isn't it? To then sort of really sort of, but I think, and I do think, but I take your point about things being required immediately. I do think that Apple culture, and everybody just wanting everything instantaneously feeds into that. But I remember being in practice myself, like donkey's years ago, because I'm also old. So I remember being when I was at Norton Rose, and there was no one had any patience with IT then. Like everything, if there's a problem, they would scream and shout at IT. If anything, I think perhaps there's an increase in status of IT now, where people are just like, they just won't take it. Whereas perhaps back in the day, people just used to shout at IT. Do you remember? Like it was pretty unacceptable.
Or have they become keyboard warriors?
I don't mean to blame Norton Rose particularly, but any firm.
But it's everyone's private lives, isn't it? We like I say, you pick up your phone and you can do anything you want to on your phone 24/7, and it works pretty quickly wherever you are in the world. And we're trying to keep up with that expectation. Also, the thing that I'm seeing is the new generation of trainee lawyers and newly qualified lawyers. The speed that they work and the output of their efforts is just on a different level. So I think their expectations and patience are a lot less than the more senior lawyers that, to be fair, work at a slower pace, really.
They grew up with technology, like they grew up with, that sort of like born with a mobile phone. Hey, listen, just let's wrap up on. So I want to talk. This was actually the question I was thinking of for you, James. I've got it wrong. So because I know obviously client service delivery is a big area for you for Seddon. So we asked, how is technology supporting improvement in client service delivery? And overall, so I mean, there was quite a mixed result, really. So some said minimal so far. I was kind of, to be honest with you, I was slightly underwhelmed. No offense to anybody who's playing. It was quite a sort of mixed bag, but I didn't get the feeling that people were saying, gosh, this is a really big area of focus for us. And I guess that fits in with what we were seeing in terms of perhaps some of the priorities, the big infrastructure projects. But I know that obviously this is a big area for Seddon's, and you already referred to sort of post-pandemic client firm can onboard clients without seeing them. You've gone sort of digital, you don't send post, all of that kind of area. So this is quite an area where you focus on quite heavily, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as I say, it's massively changed, and it's a big area of investment for us. Yeah, it doesn't work across the board. Some clients prefer to come and look their lawyers in the eye, but in terms of what we've done, we've completely moved to we describe ourselves as a digital business now. We are able to, from inception of a client all the way through to the, onboarding, AML, KYC stuff that we do, the actual transaction itself, the shutting down of the file, the billing of the file, it's all done electronically. So, as I say, our focus is on that experience that the client gets. How's that impacting them? the ability, or you know, if we are doing these transactions without them coming in the office and making them a nice cup of tea and chatting about the weather for 10 minutes before we get into it, does that detract from things? Is it a completely different service we're offering? So we really need to think about that and how we can affect that in the digital world. So that for us is a big thing and something we're really thinking about. I couldn't tell you that we've got the all the answers yet, but it's definitely something that's evolving.
What about setting up in the metaverse? That's what we're going to be doing next, isn't
Well,
it?
exactly.
We can make people tea in the metaverse.
Yeah. Wouldn't taste great, would it?
No. And you know, my builder's tea just isn't going to be the same, is it, when it's sort of served in a digital cup and it doesn't do too much? And I'm a slight skeptic there, but again, maybe I'm an old fogey again, but I'm curious to see how that particular area unfolds. I do think the focus on this area, though, is the law firm's own clients. And the law firm's own clients, their whole life is digital and has been for some years pre-COVID, okay? And with other firms, other industries, and insurance sectors and other various bits and pieces. And the last 2 years of lockdown has accelerated that in legal, but we're only catching up to where others were. And I think actually now, you know, the ultimate client base just expects to have a fully streamlined digital experience with all the people that they have to deal with professionally and personally. And that's my concern for law firms who don't think the digital journey is something to continue with and sort of complete with, because I think that expectation is just that people are going to fall behind if they don't keep up with that journey. So I just think that's the standard expectation from the ultimate client.
It also depends on the line of work that you're doing. If you're buying a house and it's ready for conveyancing, then maybe you don't need to come and talk to your lawyer. If it's a divorce case that runs over months, if not years, then actually it's a very different scenario. If it's a big corporate transaction with 3 or 4 parties involved, you know, doing that all online over Zoom or Teams becomes a nightmare. So I think certain sectors of law do lend themselves to work in that digital way much better.
But onboarding your information, you know, things like that, and connecting digitally with your client, even if you then need, because those practice areas are very direct contact, I agree, which is very unique.
It's surprising. We did a survey not that long ago talking about things like going digital in terms of post and all that kind of stuff. I was surprised by how many firms have not included. So during the pandemic, relied on all sorts of couriers, like doing curbside drops of mail and all kinds of stuff, you know, which is expensive, and I would have thought has security issues and all sorts of stuff, you know, that kind of stuff. Just it was quite surprising, I thought. Look, so we've posted in the chat, we've posted a link to the survey. If you've not done it already, we have actually had a really good number of responses, so we will be writing a report. So if you're listening to this on the recorded version, then we'll also put a link alongside it so you can carry on engaging on that basis, and then the report should have some really interesting findings. But I think we're going to wrap up there. So James, thank you so much for taking time away from your merger. It's been great to chat to you. David, thank you so much for taking time just away. And I really look forward to, I think the report's going to be really interesting. So please do give us your thoughts on that. Thank you to everyone saying thank you. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for your contributions and for making this a great therapy session.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.